Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining. Welcome to today's Virtuoso 101 session. We're going to give a few more minutes for people to join in, and then we'll get started with the introductions and the agenda. While we are waiting, I'm just going to share my screen and make sure that we are able to see the presentation. All right. If one of you can confirm if they're able to see the presentation now. Andre, are you able to see the presentation?
Yep, it's all good.
All right. And for everybody's information, this would be silent webinar. So in case you have questions while we are going through the session, please feel free to raise it in the Q&A section. So you would be able to navigate to the Q&A section and post your questions there. It would be easier for us to type it out if in case we can answer them offline. And also it would have a record of the questions asked. So in case we're not able to answer those questions, we'll reach out to you and try and answer those offline as well. All right, a few minutes post the scheduled time. Andre, should we just get started now?
Sure.
All right,
Okay.
perfect. So just a quick overview of what we are going to cover today. So the agenda is as follows. We'll do the panel introduction. We'll give a quick overview about Virtuoso QA for those who are joining for the first time, just so that you can understand what Virtuoso QA is and how we work with the GSIs. And today we've had the good fortune to get one of our premium GSI partner, DXC Technologies, on the call with us today. We'll do the panel introduction shortly. I'm going to cover the topic for the day, which is leveraging AI in software test lifecycle. We'll cover off some really interesting aspects. I think it's really key that people listen into that. And if you have your friends who've not been able to join, please feel free to send them the link. We would have this recording posted by tomorrow. So absolutely, and we're getting questions now. Absolutely, it is applicable and suitable for ERP, Salesforce. We'll talk about that as well. We're going to do a short demo so that we want to make sure that what we are talking, we are also showing it in action, so that you can better understand how this works out in actual projects and you can see the platform in action. And then we'll leave some time aside for summarizing and Q&A as well. All right. So without further ado, let me just get started with the introductions and introduce the panel. So I'm Vinay Joseph, Director for Global Alliances at Virtuoso QA, been with the company for over about 4 years now. I am essentially, my role is to work with GSI partners like DXC Technologies and some of the other ones that we are working with in making sure that we can enable those partners. We can provide them all the tools from training, sales, commercials, and that would allow us to add a lot of value to each other's GTM, go to market. So that's about me. I'll let Andre introduce himself, and then we'll go from there. Andre, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Vinay. My name is Andrei Kononov. I'm AI testing architect and lead in quality engineering team at DXC Technologies. So I've been working with AI technologies for the last years, trying to move them into the area of software testing, trying to get the most out of it. I know that AI is not a new thing in software testing overall, but with a recent, let's say, with a recent boom, and when I say recent, it's not like last half a year, recent years, a boom of generative AI technologies. We've been doing a lot in terms of applying those into software testing processes as well. And I'm responsible for driving the strategy of that adoption in DXC quality engineering, and I'm helping our DXC clients to achieve their quality objectives now with AI as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andre. And just to add a few words about Andre, so we've been working together for the past few years, and I would say the real partnership that we can see is when we see how Andre demos the platform itself. It's really interesting to see. So looking forward to this discussion, Andre, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, happy to be here.
Perfect. So let's start with a quick overview about Virtuoso. I want to cover off why we exist, Virtuoso QA as a platform. So we started in about 2017 timeframe where we wanted to build a product, and the primary use cases that we were looking at and the pain points that we were looking at, it's pretty much applicable now as well. So if you look at the recent quality engineering reports, the surveys, you would see that even now, 80% of the testing that is currently done is predominantly manual, which means that there's just about 20% of what can be automated which has been automated. Now, which essentially means that of the 20 odd percent which has been automated, about 60% is Selenium and open source solutions. And if you include all the other open source solutions, I think it's going to be upwards of 80%, which essentially means that brings in these open source solutions, though they are great to get started, they are free, but they do bring with them a lot of challenges and opportunities for us. Primary among them is that 80% of the time with Selenium users is spent on maintaining the test scripts and only about 10% in authoring new test scripts, which essentially means that the frameworks that are built on top of Selenium, they are complex, even if you build no code, low code solutions on top of Selenium. And we'll show an example today, what we've achieved with DXC. Those frameworks are complex, slow, high maintenance, and essentially means that the ROI on test automation is delivered delayed. It's not enough, and it's not quick enough because you are looking at daily code releases, hourly code releases, and it's not agile enough for you to keep pace with the kind of pace at which development can be done now, especially in the AI era. Add to it the fact that you've got a rich team of manual testers who understand business really well, but SDETs more often than not need to be paired with the manual testers who understand business so that you would be able to deliver a true correct test. And then that essentially brings up your costs further. So that addresses that causes two issues. One is the release success and the other is release frequency. So when we got started, we were trying to address these pain points in the test automation projects. So what Virtuoso QA did, we released the product in the market in about 2020. We are an AI-powered end-to-end functional testing platform, primarily focused on web applications and business systems. So there was a question earlier whether it's applicable for SAP and Salesforce. So absolutely yes. However, we are primarily focused currently on the web-based technologies, which is browser-based technologies. Now, we work with some of the biggest GSI partners, the likes of IBM, Accenture, DXC, PwC, and many more, where the reason they use us is primarily because we address a lot of concerns from a partner perspective with respect to test automation. So a primary among them, number one, we allow everyone to automate, which primarily means that whether you have a manual testing team member who are not skilled with coding, using our codeless NLP interface, they would be able to write test cases at the same speed that they can write manual test cases. they're able to start automation very early in the project lifecycle. Even if you have wireframes, you can you could start writing your test scripts based on the wireframes and even automate it or looked at the automation itself on clickable wireframes, which essentially means that you are reducing the amount of manual efforts within the sprint to test those features while the automation gets completed in the subsequent sprints, which is what we've seen in a lot of cases where we've got engaged with our GSI partners. And that all means that you are able to transition to leaner teams. You don't need a bulky team of business testers and estates to manage large projects. You would be able to significantly reduce the effort it takes for you to create and maintain, execute, and report test automation using Virtuoso QA. Now, let's come to the topic of the day. What we're going to cover today is primarily 5 things. We're going to talk about the definition of STLC, and this is something which I would bring in Andre to talk about his thoughts on how they approach software testing lifecycle and how they're able to see the impact of AI in all of these phases. We'll look at some practical applications, and this is really, really critical because we're not just going to talk about Virtuoso QA, we're going to talk about all the ways that DXC is looking at leveraging AI to solve issues within this or improve productivity within the software testing lifecycle. We're going to talk about some case studies, and this is really interesting because we're looking at really large scale enterprise implementations of Virtuoso QA with DXC's AI driven test automation as a service, which would allow you to understand how we brought it to life. And we're not talking about something which is pretty recent. These are case studies that we've been working with DXC over the past 3 to 4 years. I'm going to do a quick demo along with Andre to showcase some of those AI aspects in action with Virtuoso QA, and we're going to summarize with key takeaways as well. So with that, let's move to the very first part of the AI and STLC. And Andre, I would love to get your thoughts in terms of how you see and define the software test lifecycle, especially in the AI era, in the agile era. What are the tools and technologies that you're looking from the process perspective, and how is it that you are seeing the rapid transition from the traditional way of doing QE to the AI-driven services that you're been executing for the past few years? So would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. So let's address it one by one, I guess. In terms of the testing life cycle, good news is that it's still the same, right? Mm-hmm. We have all the core stages of software testing life cycle we've had before. Mm-hmm. Those are, let's say, in a simplified way, those are 5. It's analysis, planning, test preparation or test design, execution, and reporting. Depending on the methodology, those can loop or be in kind of a one streamlined process, but the stages are still the same. The AI didn't change the equation here. Mm-hmm. What it did change, though, is that if you remember, Vinay, all in the past, when we were saying the words test automation, we were only talking about the execution part. We never really automated the other stages. Mm-hmm. We just didn't have the technology to do that. We had means to, let's say, advance the RPA, right? The robotic automation of doing some algorithmic work with software. We were able to do that in order to execute our tests so that we can kind of reap the benefits of having those run in an automated way, right? But we never really addressed the other things. We never really did analysis in some automated way. We never really designed the tests in some automated way. We did bits of reporting, maybe like aggregation of results, like a summary, but not really, not intelligently analyzing the results that we have in those reports. What happens with this paradigm shift of AI is that with such technologies as latest, let's say, generative AI technologies and some of the narrow AI technologies, we are able to address the other stages of software testing lifecycle, and we're able to automate different kinds of activities there as well. On this slide, we have only several use cases mentioned here, and not all of them are new, right? Because the self-healing as a narrow application of AI and ML has been there for quite a while, right? It was there even before the Gen AI thing blew up.
Yeah.
Other use cases, such as, let's take the requirement and let's generate the testing scenarios, whether those are manual ones, just regular testing scenarios, or let's generate something towards automation. These are new, right? Well, relatively new. They have been around for more than a year now, I guess, but still, in terms of the whole industry and life cycle of the industry, it's not something that's been there for decades, unlike stuff like Selenium and others, right? And I think that's great. I think it's been a long time coming for a big transformation in software testing, because if we take the period, let's say 2005 to 2020, there hasn't been a lot of new things in software testing. The processes were kind of known. We always knew where we're heading. We knew the technologies we're going to use. Those kind of evolved over time, bit by bit, but there wasn't like a dramatic transformation. And during the last years, this is exactly what's happening. We're having lots and lots of new ways of doing testing with AI, because we're able to put to practice all these kind of new use cases. And as I mentioned, it's only a few of those we have mentioned here. There are way more that get uncovered, that people experiment with, that solution providers such as Virtuoso implement into testing software, and that we as service providers and our clients can enjoy working with and getting the benefits and productivity gains from.
Just to pitch in there, and I think that's a very interesting point that you brought out. I think it's moving outside of the execution part, which is what automation was primarily catering to. And I think it's not just the part where you can automate things, but it's also the fact that, hey, AI helps you do things much faster. Analysis of your requirements, right? So AI-assisted test planning, which you have shown over here, test data generation. So those are things which would give a bit more insight into what you're testing, whether it's the right coverage, or does it have issues from a requirements perspective that you can identify early in the life cycle. So hey, we all know that, hey, the cost of identifying a defect very early in the project life cycle is significantly lower compared to later stages in the STLC. It's also optimization to make sure that, hey, are we running 1,000 tests where we need to just run 500? Do we really need to increase the cost of quality? Because, hey, the more volumes you're running, it's eating up more compute, it's taking more time, it's also probably not giving you the right coverage which you need. And then also prediction, right? To identify trends from your reports and insights from your reports, which would help you understand which areas need more help. So those are aspects which are definitely revolutionized with the new realm of AI and large language models. But yeah, I'll let you cover some of those things which you're seeing from a practical application perspective within DXC. So help us get some understanding of how you're using this in real life project applications or practical applications. We'll talk about the case studies shortly, but this is something really interesting which everybody would be interested to know about.
So I think there are two key aspects to using the AI technologies, right? In practice, how do we approach this? Is, well, it's fairly simple, I would say, but at the same time, some of the aspects aren't that simple. So first is that there is, and this is a general statement, there is no platform or solution on the market that does everything, right? There are different tools that satisfy different needs, and it is completely fine, right? The landscape of testing is very diverse. I don't think there ever will be the testing tool that does everything, right? So naturally, we as service provider, we often try and pick the best tools from the market, or even come up with our own tools. Like we have those smaller AI-powered accelerators that can help us, for example, test the requirement, right? And why is that important? That comes down to practice, actually, because as anyone who has played around with AI, we know that it follows several simple principles, right? The quality of information you give to AI to do something directly impacts the quality of the output it will give you. Naturally, as soon as we started, and we are not, let's say, we're not the only ones who started, the whole industry started experimenting with, let's say, test generation out of requirements. We very quickly realized, and I mean, for any test engineer, that wasn't like a big revelation. The test engineers have always been saying that the quality of requirements needs to be higher, right? That the quality of requirements has so big impact on the testing process. It's really hard to imagine how important that is. With AI technologies and with Gen AI, let's say, when we take test generation, we can see that instantly. Lower level requirement we take gets us not as great of tests, right, as they could be. Better requirement, better test. Excellent, let's say, full of details requirement gives us great testing scenarios. So naturally, we came up with another, let's say, accelerator or AI capabilities, testing of requirements, right? That's something that isn't new to the industry as well, because if we look at the methodologies and we look at, let's say, different materials and standards, static testing of requirements is very often mentioned there. But in reality, in practice, it was almost never done, because it's very time consuming to do manually. With AI, you can do this in a matter of, let's say, minutes. Of course, it requires human oversight, same way as many other use cases of using artificial intelligence and software testing, it needs human oversight. But we're able to do that now way quicker than before. And we're able to do this as part of any project, really. So we have created our own bits and pieces for stuff like this. But of course, we work with, for example, Virtuoso to enjoy a proper big platform-like product. We as service provider, we let's say, know our limitations. We're not a product company who creates those solutions. So we are happy to work with people who actually do. And I think Virtuoso really stands out in that regard. From my personal experience and the experience of my colleagues at DXC, well, the way I call it is that Virtuoso has AI in the right places. It doesn't just have AI for the sake of AI. You know, there is a lot of hype and there is a lot of marketing around the AI nowadays. And in many cases, you would look at one tool which has AI kind of everywhere. You would investigate it, and it's just not clicking, right? It's just some tools just have AI for the sake of having AI. That's a trendy thing right now. It's completely not the case with Virtuoso. As I said, I think AI in Virtuoso is applied exactly at the right places in software testing lifecycle, which really helps the test engineers and in turn the project they're working with to gain the benefits of these technologies and the productivity increase that comes with it. So when practicing applying AI, we are always looking at what is the business challenge that we're solving. What is the bottleneck in our software testing process that we want to address? Because we're not applying AI just for the sake of applying AI, right? We want to solve some kind of a challenge we have in testing, whether it's, let's say, something is taking a lot of effort to do, or we don't have time to do that, or it's just taking a long time, right? As you mentioned before, if we're running 1,000 tests every time, well, we only need to run 500, we can optimize that. However, getting there might require a lot of analysis that a human being would spend probably days and, let's say, days on, right? But with AI, we can do that very quickly and get to that point faster. So it all comes down to the challenge we're trying to solve. I think this is the most important aspect of applying AI in software testing, right? You got to keep your eyes on the ball. You got to know what you're targeting with these different ways of applying AI, right? Because there are multiple ways you can apply in software testing, but it needs to solve your challenge. It needs to serve your business purpose, and it needs to serve your quality objectives.
So absolutely right, Andre. And I think this is a great way to talk about, hey, not all projects will have the same challenges, right?
Of course.
So I think it's really important because when we work with you and for multiple large enterprise engagements, what we've seen is I think the approach which works the best is to lay it out to understand where your bottlenecks in the process are. Because hey, everybody wants to get to the standard DevOps process where click of a button, tests are executed, and that's an absolutely go-to vision for every project. However, the challenges are different in different types of projects. So it's a good segue for us to get into some of the use cases and the case studies. And not just the use case, I think let's talk about some of those projects where we've seen different challenges, right? So when we are talking about an insurance customer, the challenge might pretty much be on the regulatory and the requirements in more ways than others. It may be related to self-healing because, hey, they are complex tests in large enterprises, right? So the amount of time it takes for you to self-heal, it may be a bigger impact compared to maybe doing synthetic data generation, all right? And in some projects, synthetic data generation itself would be the biggest trouble and bottleneck, primarily because companies and quality engineering teams, they struggle to have the real life scenarios generated in the non-production environments. And you don't want to get into the security issues, just copying and pasting data in from production. So let me just get to the next part of the presentation or this webinar, which is to talk about some of your major accounts and how. And I'm happy to say that, hey, you're absolutely right in saying that, hey, there's no single tool which will solve all the problems, and even with Virtuoso, we are focused in certain areas where we feel that there's a big impact. Yes, we are maturing and we would get there at some point in time. So would other teams as well, or so would other products as well. But it's really important to look at your project and understand what those bottlenecks are in work. So let's just understand from your perspective when we're looking at London Markets Group, for example, what were some of the biggest challenges that when we set about implementing Virtuoso that you faced, and how it impacted? And I think this is a story that we have seen over the last 3 years, right? So it would be great to understand how those challenges have evolved in the past 3 years as well.
Yeah. So in case of London Markets Group, I think one of the biggest challenges was the cost and just the sheer scale of resources they would need to do what they were targeting. Basically, they wanted to have more automation. Their existing automation was becoming kind of hard to maintain, and of course, given the fact that it was based on Selenium, it's manual maintenance. There is no self-healing there, or there was no self-healing there. And as you mentioned, a typical distribution of effort in a Selenium project is like, 70% maintenance, 30% creating new tasks. Now, that's kind of a, I would say, average. In many cases, it's worse. So there were some other, let's say, smaller challenges, like they needed to have test automation that would do both functional testing through UI and also do the API testing. And the solution they had just didn't really have that capability. And if they were to custom code it there, it would only, pull additional resources. So the challenge they really had was that if they continue on this road, they would need even more resources at scale. And those resources are also not the cheapest resources in terms of labor, right? Because in order to create new things and to maintain the code-based automation, if you take like Selenium Java, right, you need resources who are fairly technically savvy, who know object-oriented programming, who know Java, who know testing. It's labor cost. It's quite expensive. So that was, let's say, the challenge. So what we did is we helped the client to transform using Virtuoso, right, which is a big contrast to what they had before and what they have now, actually. So there are several interesting outcomes from that. I think apart from, let's say, we don't explicitly mention that, but of course their test creation process became way faster. Of course, they reduced the maintenance efforts by a lot. What was really interesting to me is how the whole testing transformed for the whole organization, because they were able not only to free some resources from maintenance, but also to create more tests faster. It allowed to actually increase the number of scenarios they run over time by a factor of 5. Basically, over half a year, they went from, I think, just under 30K monthly test executions to more than 150K, which is very impressive within 6 months. And this is a large enterprise we're talking about. This is not a small client with one application, right? And big companies have bigger application landscape, have more inertia. It's not really easy to transform those, but it went really well in this case. Apart from the fact that a lot of resources were saved on maintenance and test creation, we also observed significant improvement in quality and stability of both the tests themselves, of course, because of self-healing, and the applications that we test, because we were able to test them more frequently. It's simple as that. We can now focus on actually testing more, covering more. Faster testing not only means that your test cycle gets done within, let's say, an hour instead of days. It also means you can do those more frequently. It also means you can do that on multiple levels of environments. It also means that you can just cover more, because now your resources can create new tests instead of maintaining the old ones. So it's a multi-dimensional outcome. It always is multi-dimensional outcome, but in this case, I think one of the most interesting aspects that we have observed is the increase in the amount of testing over time that they were able to do. That was a big scale testing, to be fair.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things that I've seen in the past 3 years, I think, where the focus was primarily on the system testing, system integration testing, and in-sprint testing. The challenges now which we are solving are more related to UAT, user acceptance testing, because hey, that's one area where it was not something where you shared assets from system integration to UAT. UAT was a separate team, a firewall, which is fine. But if you look at it, there is a lot of assets which are pretty much the same and can be leveraged in intelligent way to quicken the UAT cycles as well, because most of the projects, they struggle with user acceptance, which is the fag end of the whole development cycle and the release cycle. And if there are challenges there where things are not automated, it essentially means number one, they are starting from the scratch, so they're not leveraging anything which is already there. They're not using the best practices, and most importantly, they are not they're not leveraging it in the right way so that all environments can utilize it as well, right? And that is something which we are able to showcase, and something that I would showcase in the demo as well. Just conscious of time, I think we should
Yeah.
also cover Zurich, which is um, something which is even industry has recognized. We won the Testa Award
We did.
last,
Yeah.
and we are nominated this year as well. So, I mean, would love to get your views in terms of what those challenges were and how Virtuoso was able to make that difference. Because, hey, this is a project we're talking about. Essentially, when we came in, you almost had 82%, 80 to 90% coverage in terms of your regression testing, which means
Yeah.
that the challenges were much different from London market. So yeah, would love to get your view, and then we'll jump into a quick demo before we leave some time aside for the
Sure.
Q&A.
I think the interesting aspect of challenge in case of Zurich was that they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Their testing cycles were partially automated, right? There was still quite a bit of manual things involved, and the existing automation was also, let's say, not really sufficient. It was taking a lot of time to maintain. The resources cost for that was pretty high. At the same time, they needed more automation because they wanted to test faster, and the manual team was basically not really able to keep up with that as well. So it's like, on one hand, you have the situation where if you were to test it manually, it would take too long. You would need too much time. You want to automate, but it's really expensive to automate that because
Great.
you need resources, you need time. You know, it's a code-based technology they were using back then. So they were really kind of, as I said, kind of stuck between those things. And yeah, of course, there were other, let's say, smaller in terms of scale, probably not in terms of importance, challenges. Like they were having really big feedback loops. So from the moment the test or the idea of a test scenario is created to the moment where someone from business team could take a look at it and say, oh yeah, this is a valid test. It was taking quite a lot of time because the tests were implemented in code and the business users couldn't really work with that. So they needed to have the end test results. So you have to actually run the tests, have the test results, then kind of you can look at the test results and draw your conclusions from there. That's just a longer loop. Of course, maintenance effort was a challenge as well, as it always is with code-based frameworks. So yeah, that was the challenge back then, and I think Virtuoso played really well in this case because it helped to address the most important things, that the time it takes and the effort it takes and the resources it takes to create automation in the first place became significantly reduced with Virtuoso, which allowed them to quickly grow the scope of automation.
Yeah.
At the same time, the resource cost was manageable. And instead of doing things manually, same people who would do that could now be involved into test authoring for automation, which was great. Yeah.
And I think this is one, I would say, thing that we learned during the process here as well in the past few years is this was a significant difference or differentiator with Virtuoso-based approach versus the earlier approach, because it was kind of reducing the gap between business and technology, right? Where it's not something which is a black box where you throw in a specification and the
Yeah.
SDSs write it. It's more collaborative. They can actually see the scripts in NLP. They can read it. They can even generate summaries out of it to understand exactly what the user is trying to do with the test. And that is something which is, as I said, every project has its own challenges. And this one, we thought that made a huge impact. And that's where going back to the
Yeah.
approach, looking at bottlenecks, where exactly. So that's kudos to the team, and rightly so, because they were it was also recognized by the industry in how it made a huge impact to the Zurich operations with this solution. Andre, I think I would just want to spend a little bit more time in demonstrating some of these
Yeah.
features,
Sure.
because I think it would not be fair if we just talk about it and not show the tool in action. So let me share my screen, and we will get started with a quick demo in terms of how this would make a huge impact in terms of showing that aspect to you, to say that, hey, it's not just talking about Virtuoso from a these are the benefits. And let's just look at some of the features where it really adds a lot of value from the perspective of leveraging AI, right? So
Yeah.
you able to see the screen now? I'm just logging
We're
into.
still seeing the
Okay.
presentation.
Okay, let me just change it so that we can see this. Are you able to see it now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So as we explained, it's a completely SaaS-based model, brings in a lot of other benefits in terms of reduced infrastructure from a test infrastructure perspective. So let's talk about it now. So everything that you need to do in terms of writing those tests, executing them, reporting on them, maintaining everything would be through this web-based console, which essentially means that you don't have to download, install, or configure anything. So the lead time to set up Virtuoso is virtually zero, right? I mean, just send me the email and you can get started. Everything from a test automation, and then not just test automation from an execution perspective, but we'll talk about all the other AI features which it brings in. So first aspect would be to look at how AI helps you write the test cases, right? And this is an initial feature that we released, but we are working on some exciting features which will be to showcase how it can do it at bulk. But let's just understand in its crude form how AI understands your application and suggests the test steps. And it's not just suggesting the test step, it's also weaving together the test data, the environment element as well, because it's easy for you to just write a test case, but then how does it correctly identify the data that needs to go with, and identify the variables that it needs to go with from a test data table? That's the critical part of it. So I've got a sample online banking application, which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, right? And we're trying to automate the login process. Let's just get started with that. Now, this is a self-service application, which essentially means that users can log in and see their bank accounts, do some transactions, and so on and so forth. So the first thing that you notice is as soon as you start typing in, you can select the checkpoints which are already written by other team members. So it allows you to reuse very quickly and not reinvent the wheel. But I'm going to write something which is specific to the self-service application because, hey, you've got the core banking solutions as well. Now, as soon as you start putting in this checkpoint, it is essentially looking at the various aspects that you have already provided, which is it's looking at the URL of the self-service user. It's looking at different aspects from the application, and it is suggesting a test step, which is looking at the test data as well, and specifying that, hey, it can use this test data to write the test case as well. So in this case, it's just identifying automatically from the environment that there's a username variable. It is identifying that it needs to go into the username field and just need to select that and press and it automatically identifies and does the work. Similarly, password. So it's already looking at the screen, looking at the business flow, and determining what your next step would be, right? It's as simple as that. Now, this would allow you to not just look at the steps and just automate the steps, but even look at what set of test data is required from the perspective of this application that you're looking at, and identifying the right test data as well, right? So that makes a huge impact when you're writing test cases, because number one, you're writing all of these in simple NLP based syntax. Number two, it's already suggesting and doing the hard work for you, because hey, we're looking at the username and password field, but what if you got a huge form with tens of fields, and you need to go to the test data table to identify which field needs to be associated in that? And that's the grunt work it's already doing, so that you can save time and focus on writing scripts and reduce the time it takes to write the script. Now, that's AI in action for you from an authoring perspective, right? But there's more when you look at from self-healing, and this is something that we have seen as well, where I talked about how 80% of the time is spent in maintaining the test case. So let's take an example, and somebody was asking about Salesforce. So let's just take an example of Salesforce, which is quite notorious in the fact that very dynamic UI. You go to another page and come back to the same page, the selectors would change. And all the dynamic selectors, you're not talking about just the X path, it also changes the IDs and things like that. Now,
It pretty much changes everything.
yes, absolutely. So it's a constant challenge in trying to automate it with traditional solutions. Now, what we're able to see here is that as soon as it starts, and this is happening at runtime, so it's not something there you need to have any manual intervention. You've got release one, you executed it today. Tomorrow, you've got release two with some changes, and you're running your regression scripts. As soon as it starts executing, it identifies that, hey, some of these selectors have changed. It would at runtime use machine learning algorithms and AI to identify the correct fields based on the hints and all the information it has captured when you're writing the test case. It then removes those broken selectors, adds the right selectors, and continues to run the journey without any manual intervention. So that significantly reduces the amount of time you'll have to spend in maintenance. Yes, you still need to do the maintenance in terms of looking at the business aspects. So you've got a new button, you've got a new test step that you need to write, and we are getting there in our future releases where you'll see some of those automations as well, which is to go from business requirements to test cases. But this significantly reduces the amount of time you need to spend on maintenance. So that essentially frees up, and it also gives you a good view, because it will, at every execution, it would show all the elements which were self-healed. You would be able to view it, and I'm going to be very open about it. It's not something which is going to be 100% accurate, right? Because AI will never be accurate. So it's not something which would be deterministic. However, it gives you about 93% accuracy out of the box. And as it learns more from your application, the accuracy increases as well, which essentially means that you are able to reduce the amount of time you spend in maintenance by about 95%. And that also gives you a significant tool to increase the coverage, look for optimum test cases, look for the right coverage from a positive, negative test cases. But it's not just this, right? I think there are some variety of use cases where we'll use. So one among them is, hey, you've got all of these tests that you've developed, but for somebody new coming in, it may be very difficult to understand just looking at the test on what you're trying to do, right? And this is where AI makes a huge impact, because you can just ask the AI to create a summary of it, and you can either type it in if you know and you're quite knowledgeable, but why not use AI for some of these things, which would significantly reduce the amount of time it takes for new people to onboard as well. So here it goes through all the tests that you've written, and it just summarizes in a few paragraphs what are the things which this test does. It not just does that, it also gives you executional insights in terms of your health trends and activities. So you can even ask AI to analyze the different execution trends that you see. So for example, let's just take an example which is more relevant. So I've got a job here that I've tested now. I go into the goal view and I can see the number of times it's been executed. So I just go to the latest goal and I can even ask, hey, this journey or one of those journeys which has been executed, how often it's been executed, whether it's um, what's the insight from a journey execution perspective. So those are things that you can identify from AI as well. But more interestingly, I think this is something which we have seen a lot with our GSI projects. The biggest time it takes is when you are trying to fix issues between the developer and the tester, right? So the tester would raise a concern or a defect. The developer would look at it in their environment and say, "Hey, it works fine in my environment. There's no reason to raise this defect," and there's a to and fro which goes on forever. This with AI, it allows you to reduce that time frame significantly because hey, not just it records all the executions. So there's no to and fro. The developer can come in and see exactly what were the steps that happened before, what led to the failure. It has the page source, network logs, and console logs. So why not let AI analyze the failure and give you a quick view of, hey, these are all the issues, why this failure occurred, so that it helps the developers fix it very quickly. And as always, you need to get the integrations with your defect management tool so that developers can come from your defect management tool directly into Virtuoso, look at the executions, understand why the failure occurred, and then make the fix. And once the fix is done, you would be able to see and retest it as well. So those are some of those use cases, and I hope it brings it to life in terms of how it can be leveraged in your test and life cycle phases to significantly reduce the effort it takes for you to currently execute and incrementally keep improving the life cycle and the cycle time as well, right? Any thoughts, Andre, from what you've seen and
Yeah,
how it's impacted some of
more than a few.
Absolutely.
I love a lot of features in Virtuoso, but from the ones that you've shown, I would point out two actually. So one is the summary creation, right? It looks like let's say from a technology perspective, that's not a complicated feature, right? Creating a summary of the test, and it's not. It's a good feature. However, when it comes to the value it brings, it's wonderful because, as you mentioned, it allows your peer colleagues, your fellow test engineers to review the tests. But most importantly, it also allows for the people who are not testers to get involved in the process and actually take a look at the test and see what it does. And there are multiple ways this can be leveraged. You can have a BA or a functional analyst review your test from a perspective of, is it testing the valid business logic? Does it have the correct logic in the test to do that?
Yeah.
When it comes to more complicated journeys, like the one you showcased with the Microsoft or Salesforce, yeah, it can have 50 different steps, right? And the scenario can be quite complicated. Yes, you can still read it because the steps are effectively in plain English, but it just would take time, right? As a test engineer, I could read through those fairly easily, but if a BA person is looking at those, it's not as easy, right? So having a summary, which can summarize like a 50, 100 test into a few sentences really, is really helping with that. And actually, in going back to the case studies that we've discussed, this feature turned out to be surprisingly good for Zurich. They explicitly mentioned that in the feedbacks they gave us, that this allowed them to bring the business users into the process and to shorten those feedback loops. But as I said, technology-wise, this is not something really, it's not rocket science. It's a summary feature, but it is in the right place and it's bringing a lot of value. And the second one that I wanted to highlight as well is the root cause analysis. It's very interesting because we're dealing with front-end applications, with web applications a lot, and they have quite a lot going under the hood actually. And anyone who worked with dev tools in Chrome and who has taken a good look at the console logs and all the other things that are happening in the browser, apart from the visual rendered kind of web page, knows that there is a lot of things that can go wrong there and not necessarily even get reflected on the front page. This, again, talking about AI in the right place, this just helps to shorten the time it takes me as a test engineer, for example, when I'm getting something unexpected or not getting something expected. It might be as simple as that some element I'm waiting for is not being displayed, but why is the question, right? And it might be something like a functional issue. Maybe it's a defect, but in many cases, it has something to do with what's going on under the hood. Maybe there was a 401 somewhere in the logs. Maybe there was some other networking issue. Maybe there was something else. For me to take a look at that and analyze, it's time, right? It's just more than a few minutes. So I would rerun the test in the browser manually. I would look at the logs. I would look at the console. I would, do a million of different things. And AI can do that for me really, really quickly. I think the average time I've seen it work is like within 5 to 10 seconds. It's really good. It gives you, and as you rightfully said, AI is not always right, but it's, let's say, 90% correct. It gives several, let's say, ideas here. We can see that it has 3 kind of theories on why these have failed here. And in absolute majority of the cases, I would say probably 90% of the cases, the first one is the right one. And it gives you just enough information to point you in the right direction. And you can actually go and, oh, there was a 401 in the console logs that I didn't see. You go into like the event logs right here in Virtuoso again. You look there and you're, oh, that's the problem. It's very easy. It's very intuitive and it's very quick. That's just, as I said, that's just AI in the right place. Again, it doesn't do any kind of, sophisticated magic here, but it really helps. It helps the day-to-day activities of test engineers.
Perfect. Conscious of time, we've got about 2 more minutes, but it was a really insightful discussion. I just want to round it up and give the floor to the team as well if they have questions. So just to summarize, I think we've talked about the business and technical challenges and how you can incorporate AI across the software testing lifecycle, how it addresses those challenges. We've talked about how to get started, right? I mean, it's not always the fact that there's a one-stop solution. So look at your bottlenecks, your cycle, and identify best tools available to start doing that. And a consultative approach always helps in identifying those bottlenecks. Put your team together and start doing that. We've talked about some of the challenges that we face as well. I don't think we spoke too much about it, but I think we've all had challenges in terms of how we've learned from the project problems, and RCA and some of those features are essentially direct impact of what we've learned from the projects and we've started implementing as features which have come in and added a lot of value to the customers. And we've talked about the case studies, which is really critical in understanding how you can take it to large customers and the metrics that we are able to see, right? We've got a few more minutes. I'm keen that I can take some questions. I know that there have been some questions from Shiva, but team, if there are any more questions, feel free to drop it into the Q&A, and I'm happy to answer them from the Q&A itself. Shiva, to your question, whether we're looking at SAP Desktop, that's in our pipeline, but it's not it's in our roadmap, but it's not something which is going to be available immediately. Because as you can imagine, we are focused primarily on the web-based applications, and there's a sea of challenges to address there. However, we have tools where you can integrate your existing desktop solutions. which would allow you to get an end-to-end process perspective as well. So if you need more information, please feel free to reach out to me and I can talk to you about those aspects as well. Any more questions, team, before we before we
I would like to add one thing, Vinay.
Yeah.
So because we did a fairly short demo, right? We barely scratched the surface, and we only took a look at like 3 maybe features, right?
Yeah.
And I just have to say that there are way more features like this in Virtuoso. Yeah. Every major aspect of the platform is powered with AI, and it's really good. It's, as I said, it's not just for the sake of AI. It is actually really valuable benefits that we get from it, and that's extremely important because it follows the same principle as how we apply AI, right? We apply AI to solve a business challenge. The similar way Virtuoso applies AI to solve our testers' challenge, which means like, how do I do this with AI more efficiently? And I think if we all follow the same principle, it's gonna turn out great, and it is turning out great.
Yep. There's one question though for you, Andrea. I'll take a first stab at it. But there's one of the attendees who's asked this question: is DXC also using Virtuoso for their own STLC or only at customers? How did it improve their ways of working? Just to get started on that answer, so we are working with some of the product teams at DXC as well, who are leveraging Virtuoso to implement those products and test those products before they're getting implemented for the end customers. A lot of it is not just customer facing. There are a lot of internal teams which are using Virtuoso as well. But Andre, your views?
Yes, you're absolutely right, Vinny. The short answer, yes, we do. It improved the way of working in several aspects. First, as the same as with, let's say, generally applying AI software testing, what does it give us? It gives us more productivity. Basically, we're able to do things we were able to do even before, but just faster. In absolute majority of the cases, is just doing our activities faster. So it improved many aspects. I think one of the most, let's say, noticeable impacts that tools like Virtuoso have in software testing is around time it takes to create test automation. I think that is an absolute killer, because the thing is, when talking about test automation, it's all about return on investment, right? It's about ROI. And the biggest anchor that was always dragging any kind of ROI for any automation down is the time and effort. Basically, when we say effort, we mean cost. You need to put into creating the automation in the first place before you can start running it over and over and getting some benefits, right? With Virtuoso, this first part of the equation really shrunk. It became really quick to create new automation. You don't need coding resources to do that. So your labor costs are lower. That revolutionizes the ROI equation, because as I said, always there was this fight between how much we invest and how quickly we can get it done versus how quickly we can get the benefits. Now the first part is really short. You still might need to invest, but it's nowhere as dramatic as before, and you get the test automation ready really quickly. I think this is the biggest impact it had on the ways of working that we have in software testing now. And it's not, I would say, it would be fair to say that it's not only Virtuoso, it's just generally when you apply AI when it comes to automation and you apply AI, you can get the automation put together quicker. And that allows you to have very positive ROI on test automation. Unlike before where, in many cases, I would say the ROI for the test automation was kind of balanced. It was netting to zero, not always really beneficial. We still had it because we wanted to run stuff faster. but in terms of ROI, it was not always too great.
Yeah. I think the impact is much broader. So as you rightly
For
said,
sure.
yeah, it's not just the execution times or maintenance effort. I think the impact is much larger in terms of the cycle times for review of assets, which improves the effectiveness and identifies issues very early in the project life cycle. So that's really a game changer from that perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm from Virtuoso, so I'm going to say that, hey, Virtuoso does a lot of impact compared to other tools, but I completely understand that being a GSI, and I think that's where we work a lot with GSIs, because, hey, every tool will have its own strengths and weaknesses, and we want to make sure that, as there were some questions in terms of, hey, do we cover desktop? Right now we don't. It's something in our roadmap, but I think we are getting there in terms of getting more coverage, more features added, which would allow teams to get larger impact quickly. We are short of time. We have about 5 minutes over and above the scheduled time. But thank you so much, Andre, for joining us on the Virtuoso 101 platform. It's a great way
Thank
for
you
us
for
to,
having me.
yeah, it's a great way for us to communicate what we're doing together, and for the larger GSI and direct customers as well, who come in and benefit quite a lot. I really appreciate all the effort that you put in for this presentation. And thank you, team, for joining today's call. There are some more questions which we'll aim to answer offline, but thank you so much for staying back late as well. I look forward to more participations. If you've got more ideas, feel free to send us some ideas over at hello@virtuosoqa.com in terms of what you would want to see in the next Virtuoso 101. We are keen to get you more content which is relevant to your requirements. So please do drop a note. But thank you so much for joining, and really appreciate everybody staying late. We are about 7 minutes the scheduled time. So look forward to the next session and more participation. So thank you so much, team.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vinay.
Bye.